Many people think that pressing the gas pedal too hard in low gears is the only danger of spinning a rear-wheel drive car. But to be honest, that's only one part of the truth. In this video, I reveal other, at least equally risky behaviors and situations that you absolutely need to know and master if you want to drive spiritedly and safely on the road or racetrack without ending up in the guardrail. A friend and I had a conversation about these things recently, and he was so surprised that he thought it could be really helpful for others. And don't worry, I'll explain everything step by step in a way that's easy to understand, so that you're guaranteed to get it even with little or no prior knowledge. So let's start with situation 1, a mistake that even experienced drivers sometimes make. Letting off the gas in a corner at high RPM. This phenomenon is known among driving enthusiasts as lift-off oversteer. A quick explanation for viewers who are not familiar: oversteer means that the rear axle slips away. Understeer is the exact opposite, meaning the front axle begins to slip and the car steers less. So, what happens during liftoff oversteer? You're driving through a curve quickly and giving it some gas. Then you let off the gas. Sounds unspectacular, right? But suddenly, your rear has more energy than a toddler after a double espresso and wants to go everywhere except where you want. But why? Let's take a closer look at what happens. As soon as you lift off the gas, engine braking kicks in. At high RPM, it's especially strong. This causes two things to happen. On one hand, the grip of the tires on the rear axle is challenged. After all, they are the ones in rear-wheel drive cars that transmit the braking power from the engine. On the other hand, the deceleration shifts the weight forward. You can clearly feel the effect of weight transfer when you brake hard on a bicycle. It pulls your upper body forward and maybe even lifts the rear wheel. In the car, the rear axle is relieved in the same way by the engine brake, so the rear tires are pressed less against the asphalt and therefore have less grip. This means we have a very unfavorable combination. On one hand, the grip of the rear tires decreases. On the other hand, we demand more grip from these tires due to engine braking. Imagine each wheel of your car has its own account with grip points. It's a very simplified model, but let's say the tire offers 100 points. When braking, accelerating, or cornering, you use the points and divide them between braking, accelerating, and cornering. If we demand as many or fewer grip points as the tire can deliver, all is well. For example, 100 points only for accelerating when going straight, or when accelerating in a corner, 60 points for the corner, and 40 points for accelerating. If we ask for more points because we steer more or accelerate more, for example 50 for acceleration and 60 for cornering, then the tire throws a spontaneous sliding party. Here's what happens with the grip points during liftoff oversteer. Before you lift off the gas, your rear tire's point account is full. You have 100 grip points. You use 70 points for cornering and 15 points for slight acceleration. That makes 85 points, so 15 points are not used. But then you decide to lift off the gas. Suddenly, your point account feels like it partied all night. Reduced from 100 to 85 points because the party crowd, the weight, moved forward. Now, with only 85 grip points left, and you're still trying to take the curve with the same intensity, while the engine brake demands even more points, you're in a sort of points overdraft. It's like booking a luxury vacation with your credit card, even though the account says,
"Please don't."
Or in simple terms, if you're confused by the points theory, the rear tires have less grip but have to transmit more forces than before. Result? Your rear breaks out. By the way, the numbers are exemplary to explain the principle. Please don't pin me down on the exact numbers. Did you know? On the Nürburgring Nordschleife, the longest and most dangerous racetrack in the world, there are some spots particularly known for liftoff oversteer, like Schwedenkreuz, or the left turn at the entrance to Adenauer Forst. So, what can you do to avoid liftoff oversteer? The best thing is, of course, not to suddenly let off the gas in a corner. If I must let off the gas in a corner for whatever reasons, then I try to let off the gas as gently as possible to make the car's reaction more controlled. Open the steering slightly and be ready to counter-steer directly in case of oversteer. All of this requires practice and reflex-like reactions. Hence, it's best for not-so-experienced drivers to drive defensively and not let it get that far. Let's jump straight to point 2, because you can see many drivers making this mistake in their daily driving, and under unfavorable circumstances, it will cost you your car. But before we continue, I have a request for you. If you've liked the video so far, please give us a like. It's like applause, but you don't even have to take your hands off the keyboard. This way, more people learn about the video and might become better drivers. Thank you. Shifting down in a curve. This maneuver is particularly challenging in cars with a manual transmission, but also in older automatic transmissions that do not automatically provide a charming blip of the throttle when downshifting. But let's start from the beginning. Imagine you're driving quickly through a bend. In the curve, you realize you're in too high a gear to accelerate well after the curve. So, you downshift. That means you disengage the clutch, select the lower gear, for example from 3rd to 2nd gear, and let the clutch back in. What could possibly go wrong? In fact, your car can behave like a teenager who has had their Wi-Fi turned off. Let's take a look under the hood, assuming you were in 3rd gear at 2,500 revolutions per minute. During the gear change, the RPM drops to a relaxed 1,500 revolutions per minute, but in the lower gear, the engine jumps to 4,200 revolutions per minute. This means the RPM has to increase by a whopping 2,700 revolutions per minute. Let's see what the grip points have to say about this. Before the shifting maneuver, there were a full 100 points in your rear tire's account. Because the RPM has to increase, the engine exerts an even stronger braking effect on the rear axle, and thus a stronger weight transfer than during liftoff oversteer. Instead of 100 grip points, the rear tire has only 80 grip points due to the weight transfer. 60 grip points are used for cornering, and 25 points for the stronger sudden engine brake. That's a total of 85, which is 5 points more than the tire can handle, and the rear brakes out. Or in simple terms, if you're confused by the points theory, the rear tires have less grip but have to transmit more forces than before. What can we do to avoid this situation and make our driving more controlled? The obvious thing is simply not to shift in the curve. If you know beforehand which gear you need, it's best to engage it before the curve. If you don't know the optimal gear in advance, you could wait to downshift until you're out of the curve, but that's super boring, and you're probably not here to drive like old granny. The sporter method is to blip the throttle. This means that you briefly press the accelerator when engaging the clutch to bring the engine up to the higher RPM for the lower gear.
How dare you!
This means that the tires don't have to do it, and there is no braking effect that triggers weight transfer. This is why race and rally drivers in manual cars master the driving technique, heel and toe perfectly. So with the right foot, you can operate not just one, but 2 pedals. Then you can brake, clutch, and blip the throttle simultaneously. To sum up this point, it's best if you treat shifting in a curve like your ex, better not to be in immediate proximity, and definitely not under stress. Or more seriously put, avoid shifting in curves, especially into lower gears. Optionally, practice blipping the throttle, and if you're really serious, heel and toe. I'll explain the next point more briefly since it's based on the same principles as points 1 and 2. However, this time it's not about letting off the gas. I just remembered I should add something. Not all the situations or driving errors mentioned in the video lead to the rear braking out 100% of the time. Under ideal conditions, and if you're slow, your car will drive as if on rails, even with minor driving errors. But remember, even the Titanic was unsinkable until it wasn't. It's this deceptive security that's dangerous. It is also important to note that not all car models react exactly the same way to certain situations. My goal is for you to sharpen your awareness with this video, because as soon as one or even several critical factors come into play, the likelihood of the rear breaking out increases. Such factors include sportier speed, jerky steering, fast direction change, known from the Moose test. A crest. Worn tires on the rear axle in wet conditions, poor road surface, wetness, leaves, snow or ice, steep downhill, heavy load in the trunk. These are at least the factors that come to my mind spontaneously. If you know more, it would be great if you could write a comment so that other drivers and I can learn from it. Thank you. Okay, now we really come to point 3. Braking hard in a curve at high RPM. Imagine you're driving through a curve again at high RPM and off the gas. Then you suddenly hit the brakes and the rear end becomes unsettled or even snaps out. Why is that? The grip points also help us to understand what is happening here. 55 out of 100 grip points on the rear axle are used for the curve. 15 grip points for the tire to transmit the effect of the engine brake. Now you brake, and the car's weight shifts forward. Think back to the experiment with the bicycle. So the grip on the rear axle decreases significantly. In the example of lift-off oversteer, the grip had reduced from 100 to 85. However, we're braking additionally in this new case, so the weight shifts even more. Let's assume that the grip points reduce to 75 this time. The curve still needs 55 points, and the engine brake 15. Plus, we've also used the normal brake, which also acts on the rear axle. It needs, let's say, 10 points. That's a total of 80. So the tires are 5 points over the limit and lose their grip. Similar to how I lose my self-control at the cheese counter. I'm not joking. I'm really not. If you're confused by all the points, here it is in normal words. The engine brake and the normal brake shift the weight strongly to the front so that the tires have less grip at the rear. However, the engine brake and normal brake also put more strain on these tires, which means they are overstrained. The scenario could also be the other way around. You brake what the tires can still handle despite the weight transfer, then you steer more sharply and the tires can no longer handle braking and cornering together. To avoid this dramatic experience, here's a tip. Treat braking in a curve like adding salt to your favorite dish. A little can enhance the flavor, too much ruins everything. In the next and final section, I have an exercise for you for exactly this purpose. If it is necessary to brake harder in a bend, the driver can diffuse the situation in a similar way to that described for the lift-off oversteer. Brake as gently as possible to make the car's reaction more controlled. Open the steering slightly, and be ready to countersteer directly in case of oversteer. In extreme situations, you can also press the clutch in manual cars so that the critical braking effect on the rear axle is eliminated. The fourth and final point is probably the most well-known, but I want to mention an essential driving technique for you. Too much gas in low gears in a curve. I think I don't need to explain what happens here. Do you remember the movie Back to the Future? As much as we love it, when you step on the gas, unfortunately, no flux compensator will make you travel through time. Instead, you might end up in a time where you have to call the tow truck, because the tire has to transfer more torque than its grip allows. It slips away. The more power a car has, the lower the gear, and the more throttle you apply, the more likely it is to happen. How can you deal with it? Let's think back to the grip points model, where the tire only has 100 points, so it can't provide 100 points for steering and 100 points for acceleration at the same time. The more you open up the steering, the more grip points the tire has purely for acceleration, without slipping. Let's see how it looks in real life. Here's a mental trick you can use as long as the interaction between throttle and steering is not an unconscious routine for you. Imagine an invisible string between the bottom of the steering wheel and the gas pedal. The more you return the steering wheel to the normal position, the more the string allows you to press the gas pedal down. This technique has another advantage. If you slowly press the gas, the weight of the vehicle can shift to the back, allowing the tires to build more grip. The idea with the string also works for braking. The more you steer, the more you have to release the brake pedal. You can practice this process with low speed and little braking pressure on any curve in everyday life. It really helps to build up this habit. Let's summarize this in 4 golden rules. 1. Be careful when you let off the gas in a curve at high RPM. 2. Shift into a lower gear before the curve, not in the curve. 3. The more you brake, the less you can steer. Or vice versa, the more you steer, the less you can brake. This is especially true at high RPM. 4. Only press the gas as much as you open the steering, especially in low gears or cars with a lot of power. I hope you enjoyed watching and ideally learned something new. And if you think, hey, I already knew all that, fantastic! Share your knowledge and experiences in the comments so we can all get even better. But wait, before you switch off, I have one more request. This video was completely free for you and came with more safety instructions than an airplane takeoff. If you liked it, please leave a like and a comment so more people can become better drivers. If you don't want to miss any more videos from me, I would be very, very happy about a subscription. Cheers!